responding to an objection that about holiness, and he points out all of the saints there. And then objection 4 is Catholic nations are known to be inferior to Protestant nations with regard to morality. I don't think this is really worth doing. I don't think many people would bring that up today. You can read it on your own.
Sorry, I don't have my day Ecclesia. Can I go grab it?
All right, so then we go to Article 4, whether the Roman Church is Catholic. All right. Adversaries, the heretics, are accustomed to call us by diverse names. The ancient name of Catholic no one has been able to snatch away from the Roman Church. So whether they like it or not, St. Augustine says, those heretics and schismatics, not when they speak among themselves, but when they speak with others, call the Catholic Church by no other name than Catholic. For they could not be understood unless they distinguish it by this name, by which it is called by the whole world. And that's true. Some Protestants say, well, Catholics are not Christians because they're Catholics. There were some who seceded from the root of unity, yet wanted to be called Catholic, but there is only one group, according to Passianus, which it is permitted to call Catholic. Christian is my first name, but Catholic is my last name. It's a famous quote. Nor were there lacking those who completely altered the notion of Catholicity in order that they might claim for themselves and their non-Catholic groups the mark of Catholicity which they denied to the Roman Church. For example, from the fact that there is prevalent today certain doctrines of humanity among modern rulers, and that it pertains to the laws of many people, they say that the expansion of their religion should be measured by this. But the weight and authority of the true church is not to be measured by human judgment, but according to the precepts of Christ. Lest I say too much about this matter, I will say one thing. Many of the most noble good things which are contained in the vague word of humanity, alas, mixed up with evil things, were propagated by the church without any of the evils, and are today preached by the church. See, so you're seeing that a lot today. Leo cannot talk about anything else but humanity. The church is, he did this encyclical De Lex Ite, as if the church was never conscious of caring for the poor. And he mentions all of these great religious orders that cared for the poor, all these saints. And those were all religious, and Vatican II has wiped them out. So, all this, the former centuries, as if they have some sort of comparison to make or some sort of identity with the pre-Vatican II religion, and takes credit for all of that, all of the care of the poor. And it's true that there was a lot of that. And they blew it all up. So there's nothing left but just pieces now. So anyway, humanitarianism is not the same thing as the Catholic faith. That's essentially the point here. So remember what Monsignor de la Souce says: the essence of the anti-Christian conspiracy is dogmaless humanitarianism. And he said that around 1900. It's exactly what you're seeing today. No dogmas, erase all the borders of dogmas, and humanitarianism. You see that the church is at the service of helping humanity be, getting something to eat, or purely natural things. One world. He quoted Francis, a church without borders and a world without borders. The borders of the church are its dogmas. That's what distinguishes you. In order to become Catholic, you must accept its dogmas, and therefore those who do not accept it are outside the church. So its borders are its dogmas. So a borderless church is a church without dogmas, and that's exactly what they have. So I mean, it's all very topical today. Remember, for Catholicity, an absolute condition of Catholicity is oneness of doctrine. It's one thing applied to many. So that's Catholicity. And so you have to have oneness. You have to have one government, one worship, one faith. So those things are absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you can't have the mark of Catholicity if you don't have oneness, unity. See, so that's very important too. So the thesis: the Roman Church is Catholic. The thing that thing is Catholic, which is everywhere one. But the Roman Church is everywhere one. Therefore, it is Catholic. Proof of the minor. It is one, as we have proved above. It is everywhere morally, but not physically. For one, from nearly the beginning of the preaching in all the parts of the known world to which they were able to go, the church engendered faithful for Christ, and in our time its sound has gone forth into the 5 parts of the world. And that was even more true in the later 20th century. It is so numerous that we see that it is truly, although morally, founded on the whole truth, and not only dispersed here and there. Founded on the whole earth, and not only dispersed here and there, but it was actually by 1935 or Pius XI. I don't think there was anywhere in the world where it was not, or at least where there were people, where it was not founded. Today, how do you apply this today? Those, I would say, despite some of the, let's say, discussions among traditionalists, they all have the Catholic faith. They all adhere to Catholic dogmas. So I mean, you have that mark in them, and the fact that they are occasionally fight among themselves is actually a sign that there is no Pope, because they would all obey the Pope. And it also is a sign that they're Catholics, because Catholics will only listen to the Pope. See, they won't listen to me. They're not going to listen to somebody else. In other words, they might listen, but I don't have the authority of the Pope. So what will shut them up, so to speak, is the authority of the Pope. See, so actually, when the Catholics are deprived of the Pope, they will start to fight about things not concerning faith, but concerning, let's say, practical things and theological disputes. One of the purposes of the Roman Pontiff is to settle theological disputes. So it's actually their fighting is actually a sign of their Catholicity and their sign of their allegiance to the Pope. Because the Catholics, if there were a Pope, we would all listen. So it's people roll their eyes. Oh, this is terrible. What can we have unity and all that? Now you're not going to get unity unless you have a Pope. Right? That's the answer to that question. But none of the things that are being discussed pertain to faith. Whereas the Novus Ordo has, you might say, unity of institution, but it has no unity of faith. Not at all. Zero. Argument 2, Catholicity corresponds to the mandate of Christ, saying, "Going therefore teach ye all nations." But that mandate has been fulfilled in an outstanding manner in the Roman Church. Therefore, the Roman Church is most rightly called Catholic. The Roman Church, although very often disturbed by persecutions, is expanded every day and has far exceeded in number all the sects. Now, these are numbers that pertain to 1900. Okay, so it's quite different now. I think there's 1.4 billion people that call themselves Catholics. Let's put it that way. But the actual number of those believing in the Catholic faith is probably maybe 2 or 3% of that. And then those who are practicing, I just saw the other day, the number of people practicing the faith, or practicing going to church every Sunday in Brazil, is 8%. Switzerland is 5%. France, I think, is 7%. That's these are the big Catholic countries. Brazil has millions of people. So I think it's the biggest as far as people who claim to be Catholic. I think another number of other European countries were abominable. Holland, forget it. I don't think anybody goes to church in Holland. It did say, though, this is like a little video, it said that in France, and it was the only country they mentioned, that there is a resurgence of interest in the traditional Mass, which I thought was interesting. Yes, that young people are interested. And and that is true. It's true. I mean, the average age of the people at any TLM, traditional Latin Mass, is relatively young. Maybe 30s, young families, that kind of thing. The Novus Ordo is an old age home. You get the older people that come. You see some of the videos of the people that are there. They're mostly people my age and older or almost there. It's true. They got it spoon-fed to them, and a lot of them like it. The ones that especially like it are the old ladies. I've always noticed that. It's always the old ladies, and they're the ones on the altar distributing communion, and and it's always the old ladies. They like that. Anyway, so these are numbers. 270 million now. It's 1.4 billion. So those numbers sort of don't make any sense right now. So the Roman Church brought all of Europe before the Lutheran rebellion to the Christian life and faith. In other parts of the world, the Roman Church alone bore the burden of the day and the heats. It's a quote from Sacred Scripture. And practically alone did it prepare the way of the Lord in the rough lands of the Gentiles and the barbarians. So it was the Christian church before the schism of the Greeks, and then before the Protestants. Whatever is to be found of the positive Christian religion among non-Catholics is in them as sacred relics of that faith, as it were, which were held in common with their fathers. So whatever is true in those heretic or schismatic groups are stolen from the Catholic Church, or they are natural truths of religion, such as God is omnipotent. You can reason to that. But anything that's proper to them is false. But I mean, they just took a great deal from the Catholic Church. I mean, you see their services, and you can see the remnants of Catholicism in them, especially the Anglicans. The Roman Church alone can glory in such excellent preachers of the gospel and the wondrous fruits of this preaching, such as we admire in the lives of St. Vincent Ferrer, St. Louis Bertrand, St. Francis Xavier, Blessed John of Brito. Excuse me. Monuments of Catholicity are the Roman propaganda. That was the original. See, it's the Congregation de Propaganda Fide, which means of propagating the faith. And Goebbels, who was a Catholic, do you know who Goebbels was? Goebbels was Hitler's man of I would just say, well, he was the propaganda man. He was, media and everything like that. And he was the one that liked that term propaganda because he knew it as a Catholic. And so that term has become meaning some sort of governmental message that is sent out. It could be true, it could be false, but that's Goebbels who coined that word for that. But originally it belonged to the church. Just means in Latin things to be propagated. It's a gerundive. Things to be propagated. So, the propagation of the faith in France and others. The books which are entitled Annales de la Propagation de la Foi or Annales Propagandae Fidei and others Propagandae Fidei and the lives of the apostolic men confirm that the Roman Church is the nurse of the faith in the entire world. For this is the Church of Christ, for there the Lord hath commanded blessing and life forevermore. So the Catholic Church definitely had all of the power and energy of missionary work, far more than anybody else. And in some cases, the others didn't even bother. Typically, the Eastern schismatics, they just were content with their own people in most cases, or if they emigrated to this country, they would go and follow them. But there was never an attempt to, or very little attempt to convert people to their groups. And the Protestants, to a certain extent, especially Anglicans, in Nigeria and the British Empire, you saw some of that, but nothing like what the Catholics were doing. Objections. There are some people who knew the Roman Church only after many centuries, therefore the Roman Church was not always Catholic. Response. I distinguish the antecedent, that there were people of this type in the unknown world, let it pass. In the known world, I subdistinguish, and this proves that there was no metaphysical Catholicity, I concede, in other words, where every single person heard about it. Moral, I deny. So there was moral Catholicity. The founder of the church established preachers of the gospel and not discoverers of regions, but rather preachers to those regions which were already discovered. So the whole Roman Empire was done fairly quickly. And St. Thomas got into India, as we know, and as soon as other parts were discovered, there were Catholic priests going there and many times losing their lives in order to be there, or putting up with a great deal of difficulty. North American martyrs, for example, they had both the difficulty and the martyrdom. So, living conditions which were absolutely abominable. Jean de Brebeuf may have told you he had to, in his first winter, he had to live in one of their longhouses, which was just exactly what it's like a long garage. And there was, the Indians would defecate right on the floor. Yeah, there was no bathroom. And they would urinate and defecate on the floor. And then there was open love. And he had to, sleep in that. Imagine the stench. And there was, the idea of fidelity to one's wife was non-existent. Yeah, he had to put up with that, and that was in Canada, where the winters are. There was Midland, what isn't presently Midland, Ontario area. The winters up there last quite a long time. More than say here, and so I'm sure that was 3 or 4 months that he had to do that. Then as soon as the spring came, he and other priests built a house for themselves. And if you ever have the opportunity, that was reconstructed by the Canadian government. It's in Midland, Ontario. It's you have to cross the bridge into Windsor and then go up the coast of Lake Huron, and it's a little ride from, say, Detroit, but it's worth seeing. And you can see how they lived in very, very primitive conditions. The priests, they built. It was like camping out, essentially. I mean, they built what you call a shack, and they had bunk beds. That's how they lived. And they had two sections of it. One was for the non-converted Indians, and it was like a fort, and another for the converted Indians. So it's worth seeing. It's only in the summer, though. They close it in the winter. So, for this reason, it is not repugnant to Catholicism that before Columbus, the gospel had not been preached to the peoples of America. But the church never stopped enlarging the place of its tent in those regions which were known. If Tertullian already in his time did not hesitate to assert concerning Christ, he reigns everywhere and is adored everywhere. Indeed, the church of today is so strong in numbers and extension that, morally speaking, it is contained by no limitations of region. Instance, the Catholicity of the Roman Church is not a fixed fact, since it has fluctuated a great deal when the religion of Mohammed overtook a great part of Christianity, when Photius split from Rome, when the reformers of the 16th century snatched away many nations from it. Besides, in the 20th century, there is not found either in Asia or in Africa a great multitude of Catholics. Therefore, Catholicity does not pertain to the Roman Church. I distinguish the consequent. A mathematical Catholicity does not pertain to the Roman Church. I concede. A moral Catholicity I deny. We have already described the nature of the mark of Catholicity from the statements of Christ and from the very nature of the thing. According to this concept, Catholicity must be looked at in a dynamic way as well. The power of Christ, which inheres in the church, does not exclude great calamities which Christ himself predicted for his church. Nor is the supreme or definitive effect of this supernatural power determined to a time, but always continues the temple of the church among great ruins in her unity, preserving the admirable work of restoration and amplification in such a way that this axiom, ubique unum, everywhere one thing, which must be present in a certain group without interruption, is safely recognized. So the point is that the church must constantly expand and be present in every land of the known world. That is the Catholicity of the church. There could be a few Catholics, here, there, and the other place, but there has to be this energy and this establishment of Catholicism everywhere. That's the Catholicity of the church. So it might have a lot of people someplace, it might not have a lot of people someplace, but it's everywhere, or it intends to be everywhere and strives to be everywhere. See, that's the Catholicity of the church. We just got somebody in India wants us to come to India. Somebody in Iran. So that's the Catholicity of the Catholic Church. So we'll send you back to India, right? But no, we'll give that to Father Eldraker, who goes to all of those places in those areas. He won't go to Iran. I won't let him go to Iran. So. But there is a traditional Catholic person in Iran. So. For this reason, when the Donatists showed to the Catholics the many barbarian peoples who had not yet been converted to Christ, or the many heresies which were alien to the communion of Catholic society, St. Augustine showed the Church how, by growing, it does not cease to be fruitful until the end comes when it has been preached to all men. You see, and remember what our Lord said, when I return to the earth, will I find faith on the face of the earth? And all the commentators took the answer to mean no. In other words, and also St. Paul says there will be a great apostasy from the faith. So you're not necessarily seeing a happy ending to humanity. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to be the other way. All right, so that the church should be reduced to a very small number, and people will apostatize and revolt against the faith. So it's just that as I said, the drive of the church must be there in order that it be Catholic and that it expand wherever it possibly can, and all the lands of the earth. Also in the Epistle 199. Oh, let's see. Yes, St. Augustine showed the church how by growing it does not cease to be fruitful until the end. Yes, we said that. He said the church grows in the whole world, for it still has that by which it grows until the prophecy of Solomon is fulfilled, which was said of Christ, he shall reign from sea to sea. That's on the coat of arms of Canada, Mare Usque, yes, Mare Usque, Mare, and from the river all the way to the ends of the earth. All right. Objection 2. The charism of preaching is not proper to the Roman Church, therefore the intimate cause of Catholicity cannot be proved from it. Proof of the antecedent, the missionaries of the Protestants have spread the gospel over the whole world. The vast empire of the Russians has learned the faith of Christ from the Phocians. Response, I distinguish the antecedent. The charism of preaching is not proper to the Roman Church. Materially, I concede. Formally, I deny. The distinction is evident from those things which we have discussed above. However, I respond to the proofs. Concerning what is said of the Protestants, I deny, despite whatever the missionaries of the Protestants and the biblical societies have done, there is lacking to them unity. And when unity is removed, Catholicity cannot even be thought of. I will pass over in silence those things which have been said concerning the relative sterility of the missions and of the character of the Protestant apostolate. B. In what concerns the conversion of the Russians, I also deny, for the greatest part of the Russians were taught the Christian faith from the years 857 to 1015, especially under the reign of Vladimir, who reigned from 980 to 1015. That was in Kiev. See, in this time, the union of the Russians with the Roman See had not been broken. Besides, the charism of preaching does not consist in the mere fact that opinions are propagated in this or that nation. The Russian Church is nothing outside of Russia, and within Russia it is propagated by the whip and corruption. See, for example, you'd be surprised to know that the Catholics rejoiced in the early Russian Revolution, where the Tsar was deposed, and then you had the Kerensky government in 1917, because Kerensky said the Catholics can have their public worship, and so they had a Corpus Christi procession in St. Petersburg. Before that time, Catholicism was only tolerated under the Tsar. And that's why to this day, the Russian Catholics have the traditional Latin Mass. Well, at least the traditional ones do, because the Tsar would not permit them to have the Eastern Rite, the Ruthenian Rite, in Cyrillic and the Slavonic, because it would compete with the Russian Church. So that was Tsar Nicholas II, who was a Freemason. He was. But so it's true that because the Tsar is the head of the Church, so to be non-Russian Orthodox would be to be against the Tsar. See, so it's all tied up with the nation. And it's true that, they didn't go out to the whole world and make Russian Orthodox people. They didn't. They were very happy to keep it within Russia. So, for it is evident to all that from the year 1772, the principal preachers of the gospel were Catherine II, who was unspeakable, Nicholas I, and Alexander II, of whom Gimasco and Popiel were their cruel mercenaries. Instance, Roman excludes Catholic, and this is sometimes people say this, because Catholicity is restricted to the word Roman. I respond by distinguishing Roman explains Catholicity, I concede, restricts it, I deny. In fact, that thing is said to be Catholic, which is everywhere one. Therefore, it is required for Catholicity in the same way that there is for a circle that there be a center and a circumference. Roman is the center of unity. Catholic designates broad extension of the Church. Therefore, the term Roman Catholic is the most explicit expression of Catholicity itself, and is absolutely true. See, so it could not be one unless it was one in government, and Rome is center of government. Any problems? No. Whether the Roman Church is apostolic. The adversaries prefer nothing more than to attack the apostolicity of the Roman Church. In fact, many of them have lost the true concept of apostolicity. It must be seen, therefore, whether the Roman Church is marked by that apostolicity which we have described above. Dogmatic theologians confirm the apostolic origins of each of the dogmas by the testimony of the Fathers. We must prove, however, by certain and evident and public facts that the apostles, the messengers of Christ, were the founders of the Roman Church. So it can show its apostolicity in doctrine by pointing out how the early church believed the same things that we do. But we have to see that the actual founders, it was, of course, our blessed Lord and the apostles and those to whom they gave the episcopacy, etc. To the Roman Church belong all those who have remained in the root with the See of Peter. The Protestants, Luther and Calvin, and the unbelievers, Renan, Réville, and Harnack, contend that the origins of the Christian religion and the Church of Rome are very different. Against these, we propose the following thesis. So look at Ernest Renan, a French writer and famous rationalist, born and raised in a pious Breton family, so Brittany. He went to Paris at an early age and studied for the priesthood at Saint-Sulpice. That was the big seminary in Paris, Saint-Sulpice, run by the Sulpicians, in case you couldn't figure that out. There he received training in Cartesian philosophy. Thomism was not taught in except in Dominican houses, but the Jesuits and others were using Cartesian philosophy for their philosophy courses. And that's why Leo XIII said everybody's got to adopt Thomism, and extolled St. Thomas, because he wanted to get rid of that. It was a form of corruption. I mean, Cartesian. I think, therefore I am. I mean, the whole thing is based on garbage, and it's all rationalistic, and but that's what they were studying. But the Jesuits too were doing that. He also was an avid reader of Hegel. Remember Hegel? No, the others won't remember. Hegel was the evolutionist. He was a nut. He said, I can't get my students to understand that the first principle of reason does not apply. First principle of reason is something cannot be and not be at the same time. That's not true. That's what Hegel said. All right. So he's from the early 1800s. Oh my goodness. What about that? We'll just finish this footnote. In 1845, he quit the seminary and the Catholic faith. He became an expert in Oriental languages. After traveling to the Holy Land in the 1860s, he wrote his famous Life of Jesus, in which he denied the divinity of Christ. His other famous work, it was The Origins of Christianity. He enjoyed immense popularity and was one of the main figures contributing to modernism. A quotation from Renan: God, if there is a God, take my soul, if I have a soul. All right, on that we will quit. He was horrible. I wonder where he is right now. Let's put it that way. 21. What do I do with those? Oh, there we go. sent Ramirio the quiz. Well, he did it himself the last time. Sent it all to him too. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, amen. Veni Sancte Spiritus, repletavorum cora fidelium et tuae amoris igneis ignem accende. Sub tuum presidium confugimus Sancta Dei genitrix, nostras deprecationes et despicias in necessitatibus, sed ab periculis cunctis libera nos semper, Virgo gloriosa et benedicta.
Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, amen.